Right, thanks everybody for turning up. This is the first meeting of the new cooperative group Total Democracy. I'd like to thank obviously everybody turning up today. It is, as I say, an actual historic moment, because in Britain we don't have a tradition of parties working together, albeit you have a coalition at the moment, but it's not a willing coalition. But all the people and the groups that have joined Total Democracy are willing participants, because we believe it's a good concept. We'd like people that have turned up to be our audience today. Our main purpose, of course, is to spiral out what we're trying to do to the world, what we're trying to change in this country, and obviously it will take time. But as I always say, from little acorns. Thank you very much for being our audience today. We have a number of apologies from people. The Popular Alliance leader and deputy leader couldn't make it today. They're very much a businessman's party, so they're always working, but they're with us today in spirit. Also, earlier we went to Parliament, outside Parliament, where we unveiled our banner, which you'll see at the bottom here, the Total Democracy banner, with representatives from the parties. And we thought that was important to show that those inside Parliament don't represent most ordinary people's views. We feel, they're political elites that have their own opinions of things, and it's often very different to our opinions. There was a contrast to say, we're here, you're there, but there's a massive gulf between us. What we're going to do very briefly today is introduce at least 3 speakers from the 3 parties today to give their opinion of what this Total Democracy is all about and what we intend and aim to do. We'll also be unveiling the first campaign which Total Democracy will be promoting, which we call None of the Above, which will be explained by us later what that's all about. And I will invite speakers to come up as we go, and at the end we'll do a questions and answers if anybody wants to ask us any questions. Mike is videoing the proceedings today, also taking pictures, which we'll be using obviously to promote what we're doing over the next number of months. So what is Total Democracy? What is it? Well, if you look at the first press statement that we sent out when the parties came together and agreed that we would form this body, we said that it was a coalition of parties, pressure groups, individuals, and anyone else with an interest in politics and democracy. So we know it's a political group, it's talking about politics. But who is it for? Well, if you look at the strap lines, like the logos, and the sound bites, words you might have heard before, we say ordinary people reclaiming politics. So it's not for professional politicians, the ones in Parliament that we waved at today. All of us here are part-time conviction politicians. We do it because we'd like to see change. We don't do it for money. It costs us money. It costs us time. Professional politicians that largely run the world, they do it full-time. They get paid lots of money, and of course seem to claim lots of expenses as well. And they're very, very different from us. So whilst we're perhaps competing with them for the public's interest, we're very, very different. And we don't intend to become like them. The other strapline that we use, we say Total Democracy is a body of like-minded small parties, groups and independents cooperating together to reclaim democracy for the nation. The change we'd like to see is to bring politics back to the people. In other words, democracy. Democracy is a word that everybody uses, don't they? Everybody says, oh, we're democratic. But what actually is democracy? Well, the term originates from the Greek word, demokratia, which means simply rule of the people. Clearly, under that definition, our political systems are very far from democratic. We live under what we call a representative democracy. In other words, somebody who decides what's best for us. I don't regard that as ruled by people, do you? I think that's ruled by political elites who think they know best. And on moments of candour, these politicians will admit that they think they know best. So, if they're not very democratic, they're also not very representative. Because whatever the issue, whatever the topic you seem to talk about or believe in, whether it's in war or in peace, there's usually a massive gulf, a gaping gulf between what the ordinary people think and what these professional politicians think. There is a massive gulf. And we'll all know ourselves, won't we, individually, of issues that concern you, that you wonder what planet the professional politicians are on, because they always seem to come to a different conclusion to the likes of all of us probably here today. And that's very significant, because in a representative democracy, they're supposed to represent us. My understanding is they're supposed to represent our views. But their understanding is they're representing their own views and deciding what should happen for us. That's not what I call a proper democracy. And that's not how I was brought up. But unfortunately, sadly, that's how I've learnt. That is exactly how we're being treated in this country. For the NLP, National Liberal Party, which I represent, that gulf we talk about might be the gulf between the rhetoric of self-determination, which our politicians talk about, and the actual practice. So in other words, they talk about it, they use these sound bites, but they never follow it. They don't follow through. May I say for the DRP, the Democratic Reform Party, it might be the gulf between calls for political reform and the resistance of Parliament to change anything. So they all say things should be reformed, we need to change things, it's not right what we're doing. But does anything ever change? It doesn't change, does it? They talk the fight, but they never follow through. And perhaps for the Popular Democratic Party, who have the leader, Lee Holmes, here today, perhaps it might be the gulf between what politicians say they're going to do and what they actually do. And then for the Popular Alliance, who's also part of this group, they would probably say that it's Parliament's failure, or the members of the Parliament's politicians' fault, that they think they know best, but very few of them have ever worked in the real world. Quite a lot of them are professional politicians and have been from a very, very long time. They're not out there learning the trade, learning how ordinary people operate. So the gulf between professional politicians and the system and ordinary people is quite massive. And I think most people here today, and perhaps even most people outside here today, would agree. But what do? Clearly, the people of this country's way of showing their objections to the system is by not voting. It's by staying home. And we know that the last few elections, the turnouts have been dropping, despite all the postal vote, ease of getting a postal vote now, and ease of getting proxy votes, including, of course, fraudulent postal votes, fraudulent proxy votes, proxy votes, sorry. There is massive amount of fraud going on and exploited in some of these elections, yet still the turnouts are falling. The turnouts for these elections are getting lower and lower. And I believe that we had an election not that long ago which produced a turnout which is the lowest since the war. So it's not uncommon for people to not vote to make their protest. So if we all agree that there's a democratic deficit between what the politicians say we have and what we know we have, how will total democracy then, how will we operate? How will